Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Fred from Bamboo Batu. Today I'm talking about hemp and bamboo for carbon credits. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. Everybody's always asking me about carbon credits, especially when it's related to bamboo. I got it started in the hemp business in 1996, so I do know a thing or two about hemp cultivation, hemp industry. I've been in the bamboo business since 2006, so I've been around the block with the bamboo a few times. And the last few years, I've been working in the carbon credit market with carbon credit space with biochar primarily, but a lot of overlap with bamboo there as well. So it's something I know a lot about. People ask me about this stuff all the time. It's a little bit complicated to explain. People call me up and ask me for a 5 minute breakdown. It's really hard to do that. So hopefully this video is going to help people out. And I'm going to try to make it clear and understandable for the average viewer. So wish me luck with that. If you want to know more about bamboo and biochar, things like that, subscribe to my channel. Got lots and lots of videos. Got about 150 something videos maybe by now. Check out my website, bamboobatu.com. There's about 400 or 500 articles on there. This is all free content. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link. You can buy me a coffee and support all this free content. I do put a lot of time and energy into this, so appreciate your support. And let's get into it. So carbon credits. Carbon credits are a kind of confusing, kind of controversial subject. So why do we have carbon credits? Why is there a carbon credit market? Because modern life is really messy and we've polluted the world like crazy as a species. And we need to find a way out of this climate problem, this environmental crisis that we face. And carbon credits, the carbon credit system is one way to do that. It might not be the perfect system. If there were a perfect system out there, I'd like to know about it. Let me know in the comments if you know a perfect system. But this is a system which has some flaws, but it's set out to do what it does, and it does it okay. And there are other ways to address the climate crisis. We need more than one tool to do that, but this is the carbon credit voluntary market. So there's a voluntary carbon market, the VCM, and there's a lot of abbreviations and acronyms in this industry. So brace yourself for that. But the VCM is the voluntary carbon market. So we're talking about carbon credits that are generated and traded voluntarily by companies that are trying to achieve their net zero goals. There's also a compliance market, which are generally national markets with carbon offsets between companies based on national laws and regulations. It's quite different. There might be a merging of these two markets in the next 5 or 10 years, but right now we're not going to worry about that because that gets really complicated. So we're just going to stick with the voluntary carbon market right now, which has some pros and cons. Some of the biggest criticisms are people say, "Oh, this is just a free pass for gross polluters who don't want to deal with their pollution and their emissions, and so they just go out and pay for carbon credits, and those carbon credits will kind of offset their emissions, so they don't have to reduce the emissions within their own production, within their own supply chains, within their own operations. Instead, they're just going to skim off their profits and pay a small penalty in the form of purchasing these carbon credits. That's one criticism. Another criticism is there's lots of fraud and cheating in this system. Unfortunately, I've yet to find a system that involves an exchange of money and currency that does not involve cheating. Humans, when incentivized by money, will find a way to cheat the system. And that's a sad reality. But it doesn't mean that everyone's a cheater. And there are ways to create some boundaries and guardrails to reduce that cheating and reduce the risk of fraud. And that's something that's been going on quite a bit in the last few years. Every time someone's called out and exposed for some kind of fraudulent carbon project, every time they're exposed, that reveals a loophole or something in the system, and the system is able to accommodate to that and find ways to prevent that from happening in the future, and inform buyers of carbon credits that they need to pay attention and look out for certain things, certain red flags around projects to identify higher risks. And so that's just part of the evolution of this market. But yeah, you find cheating in fraud in cryptocurrency, in any commodity trading market, the New York Stock Exchange. There's going to be cheaters out there. So yeah, buyer beware. Do your homework before you buy a bunch of carbon credits, and do your homework before you pay someone $100,000 for a feasibility study to get listed on a carbon credit registry that no one's ever heard of. Yeah, there's some things to look out for. So the benefits, advantages of the carbon credit system, it does make net zero goals achievable. We can say that it gives free pass, or get out of jail free card, although it's not really free if you're paying for the credits, but a pass to avoid having to reduce emissions for your company. In many cases, companies cannot actually achieve that net zero just by reducing the emissions within their own operations. There's a lot of emissions associated with the way industry has been created over the last couple centuries, and there's a lot that people can do to reduce those emissions. Companies can reduce those emissions, but it's hard to get to net zero in many cases without having the ability to supplement those actions with something else, like um, these carbon credits. So they can get pretty close to net zero, but then they still need to pay to purchase a few more carbon credits to get all the way to net zero to balance out their emissions um, with their positive contributions. And so that's one of the benefits I see of the system that people don't really look at when they talk about this free pass for polluters. So it incentivizes, if you know you have to pay for carbon credits, it's like I said, it's not a free pass. You still have to pay for it. So there's more incentive for the companies to reduce their emissions and change the way that they operate and find better efficiencies, better technologies that are going to be more climate friendly. And so this carbon market incentivizes that type of innovation. Instead of having to purchase carbon credits, you spend the money on improving your own systems, improving your own technology, which in the long run is going to make the business leaner and more profitable. At least that's what we hope. And another benefit is that it is a finance mechanism for climate positive projects. So there are a lot of great projects out there trying to do climate positive work in the developing world, in the industrial world, all over the place. Great innovations, great ideas, and they need capital. They need money to operate. They need money for research and development. And these carbon credits are a great way to get some early finance on these projects before they're really scaled up and then profitable. So that finance mechanism is really important, and we see a lot of projects that are using this carbon credit finance revenue to do some real positive work. So there's some good things going on with carbon credit revenue, something to be aware of. So let's back up a little bit and explain how this whole system works. Carbon credit system. A carbon credit is created when action is taken to remove or avoid the emission of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide or CO2 equivalent from the atmosphere. So there's a couple interesting things here. There's removal and there's avoidance. There's projects that are removing carbon, actually sucking carbon out of the air, maybe with direct air capture or with biochar, taking CO2, storing it underground as carbon, which is a really important thing to do to get that carbon out of the atmosphere. And then there's avoidance, and that is something like, for example, a wind energy farm. It's not actively removing CO2 from the atmosphere, but it's producing energy in a way that does not emit CO2. It does not have CO2 emissions with that project, and so it's avoiding the emissions. So the metaphor that's usually used is like a bathtub. We say the bathtub is filling up like the atmosphere is filling up with the CO2, and we can turn off the tap to stop the bathtub from filling up. In other words, reduce those emissions to stop pumping CO2 into the atmosphere. But even if we turn that tap all the way off down to zero emissions, the bathtub is still going to be full. So we need other projects, other activities out there that are draining the bathtub, removing that CO2. So there's that CO2 removal, draining the bathtub, and then there's CO2 avoidance, which is stopping the flow into the bathtub, the flow of CO2 into the atmosphere. So if companies are reducing their emissions, that's great. but that isn't going to get all that CO2 out of the atmosphere. So another reason why the carbon credit generating projects are important. If they are carbon removal projects, which is what I'm all about, then that's a pretty important and valuable thing to have going on. So 1 ton of CO2 is equal to 1 credit. So you talk about 1 carbon credit, that is 1 ton of CO2. However, not every credit is equal to any other credit. Some credits are worth $5 or $10. Some credits are worth $500 or $600, and so there's a whole story behind each credit that explains the value of the credit and where that money is going, and why one credit is worth more than another. So, unlike most commodity markets, it's not like every certificate is equal in value to every other certificate. There's a great variety of projects, and each project has credits specifically associated with that project and a price based on the costs and other factors around that project. So, some interesting things that can get confusing in this space. So, carbon credit generation. So, here's how you generate a carbon credit. That's easier said than done. But you set up your carbon removal project. You could be planting a forest. You could be building some kind of cool factory that's sucking CO2 out of the air. You could be planting bamboo. You could be doing a lot of different things. And then there's a rigorous assessment and approval process through some recognized methodology and third-party verification. So that recognized methodology is pretty important. You can't just go out and say, hey, look, I planted this forest, or I built this machine and I'm removing carbon from the air, and here's my credits. You need to get it certified by somebody. And there's a lot of different somebodies out there. Some are better known than others. Some are more reputable. Some are more recognized on the market. And so it's important to get your project recognized through a methodology that will be recognized by purchasers of carbon credits. Otherwise, you're stuck with a whole bunch of carbon credits that nobody wants to purchase, which kind of defeats the purpose and part of the purpose. If you're still removing carbon, that's great. But if you're trying to finance it with the credits, then you got to make sure your credits are legit and that other people will also believe that they're legit. So once those credits are generated, they can be sold on the voluntary carbon market, as we've been talking about. Those credits are registered somewhere on a registry and tracked so that once they're sold, they are retired and they can't be used again. And that will help to guarantee authenticity and prevent fraud. Lots of other guardrails and regulations out there to prevent fraud, but we will leave it at that for now. Carbon credit registries. Does the industry have a trust issue? There have been some exposés. If you read the Guardian newspaper, you'll find they're always like eager to expose somebody for something. And yeah, there've been some shady operations where projects have grossly overestimated how much carbon they've been removing, thereby generating way more credits than they should have, and then selling those credits, only to find out a few years later that the buyers ended up with a bunch of credits that aren't so valuable. And so when it comes to offsetting their emissions from their industrial operations, there's not as much offsetting that can be done. So yeah, there's some scandals out there. There's also just so many registries. It's hard to know which registry is trustworthy, which methodology is trustworthy, which one is legit, which one is just a bunch of smoke and mirrors. It can be confusing. I've read through quite a few methodologies, and oftentimes you need a PhD in chemistry or something to really be sure that this is legit, or if it's just some fuzzy logic. So it can be tricky. Sometimes you just have to defer to a trusted source who you can rely on, and if they say it's good, then you can say, okay, um, these guys say it's good, so therefore I believe it's good. And there are some experts out there that you can check out. You can do some homework on that. Maybe I'll put some links down below in the show notes. So what are we doing about these issues? Carbon removal versus reduction. That's one important thing. Most of the scandalous projects that were exposed were related to carbon reduction. These were projects where they were protecting existing forests. And so they didn't plant a new forest, but they were protecting a forest that was already there. So it was a little bit hard to say how much they actually contributed to carbon removal. The forest was already there, and you can speculate what would happen if they had not protected the forest, but this is all speculation. So it's all about comparing that baseline, what would have happened without our activity, without our project versus what's happening with our project. And so if you're speculating, well, we're protecting the project, and here's the scenario if we have not protected the forest, it's all hypothetical. That you can say that, oh, the forest would have been cut down and all of this would have been turned into firewood or charcoal or something, but it's a bit of a guessing game. So when you have a denuded landscape that used to be a gold mine or a titanium mine or something in Africa, and the landscape is all ruined and unfarmable, and you go and do some extensive project and turn that degraded landscape into a lush forest, then you're comparing the baseline denuded landscape to your project lush forest, and then you have a better comparison, and that would be uh, additional carbon removal, which would be a good way to generate carbon credits, and the kind of project that I would want to support if I were out there buying carbon credits. And just a few more notes on the carbon credit market, and then we're going to get into the bamboo and hemp, which is probably why you're here, because that's what I want to talk about. Carbon credit market is growing for sure. There's, like any other market, there's speculation around how fast it's growing and how large it will grow to. But there are international treaties, the Paris Agreement, the COP. Every couple times a year, the COP gets together. We said COP 29, I think, in Baku. Um, so these treaties are encouraging and incentivizing and creating requirements for companies and countries to achieve these net zero goals. And the carbon credit market is one of the ways they can achieve those goals. And so it's creating more and more pressure on companies to find solutions, not only reducing their own emissions, but also purchasing credits to get all the way from low emissions all the way down to net zero. And there's lots of companies and countries now that have 2030 net zero or carbon neutral goals. In the meantime, this is causing the demand for carbon credits to grow. The price for carbon credits will probably go up, but there's a lot of unknowns around that. How high will the prices go? Will the prices come down as more and more carbon projects come online? Because the supply of credits will start to increase, and perhaps the supply of credits will surpass the demand for credits, causing the price of credits to go down. It's hard to say. A lot of speculation. According to Global Newswire, the carbon capture sequestration market size is expected to grow from $2 billion in 2021 to $7 billion by 2028. That's an educated guess, but most people agree that this market is growing. And so investing in carbon positive projects or carbon removing projects, there's a little bit of confusion when people say carbon positive and carbon negative, but climate positive is what I meant. Climate positive projects should become more and more attractive, not only for saving the planet, but also for expanding your investment portfolio. So if we can get those two targets in alignment, that would make a better world, in my opinion. Incentivizing people to do positive things for the climate, not just for the climate, but knowing that it's also profitable for their pocketbook. So let's get into it. Bamboo and hemp. Bamboo as a carbon sink. As you know, I've been talking about bamboo for years, and it's an amazing plant. It grows super fast. It grows faster than just about anything. And as it's growing faster than trees, it also absorbs more CO2 than trees through photosynthesis, the process by which plants and trees absorb CO2 from the air and release oxygen. At the same time, when they take that CO2, the O2 goes back in the air. The carbon, is stored in the plant. So that's what photosynthesis does. And at the same time, it's also producing sugars from the sunlight, from the chlorophyll. But what we're interested in here is the carbon that's being absorbed from the atmosphere. And bamboo is really good at that. It stores all that carbon in the roots and the biomass. And even after the bamboo is harvested, if it's harvested appropriately and properly, the carbon will remain, and the plant will continue to live and flourish as the life center core of the plant. The energy of the plant is really in the rhizome and those roots underground in the bamboo. So you harvest the poles, but the bamboo itself is still alive, not like a tree. If you cut down a tree and all you have left is a stump, with most trees anyway, then the tree is dead and the carbon is released back from the stump and from the roots. But not the case with bamboo. So you have a long-term carbon sink with bamboo. So there's about 1,600 species of bamboo is a grass. These are perennial grasses, meaning they grow year in and year out. Unlike other plants, which will grow for a year and then flower and die, bamboo stays around more like a tree, although it's a grass. It's not a tree. About 1,600 species. And when it comes to carbon removal, carbon sequestration, what you want to do is grow these big, giant bamboos. That's my friend Tono there in Guatemala with his Dendrocalamus asper farm. Dendrocalamus asper is one of the most amazing species of bamboo. It's a tropical giant bamboo, absorbs lots of CO2. And it's a popular one for carbon projects. Bambusa balcoa is also a good choice. It's a tropical species. It's not quite as beautiful as the asper, but it's a big one and a fast grower and takes in a lot of CO2. In more temperate regions in Europe or North America, for example, Phylostachys edulis could be more popular. Other species of Phylostachys. These are the running bamboos that grow well in colder climates. And they can have hot summers, but they will survive cold winters as well. And so it's a popular species. And it's the species grown in China for most commercial uses. Yeah, so there's a lot of bamboo species out there, but these big ones are the ones that you want to be looking at for a carbon project. So when it comes down to the numbers, bamboo captures about 20 to 30 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. Remember, 1 ton equals 1 credit. So we want to be measuring tons of CO2 here. Agroforestry carbon credits, that's credits based on planting trees or other crops. Currently selling for about $10 or $15 per credit. That could change by the time this video comes out, or by the time you watch it, that may have changed. But in 2024, these credits are selling around $10 to $15 for agroforestry credits. The price is expected to rise. So conservatively, if you say 20 tons CO2 per hectare, we're looking at maybe $200 to $300 per hectare. Sorry, that says acre there. I meant to say hectare. About $200 to $300 per hectare. So right now on the Verra standard, which is one of the most widely recognized and reputable methodologies and registries out there for carbon credits, there are about 20 different projects related to bamboo farming. These are in Africa, in Ghana, Zambia. There's some in the Philippines. I think there's some in Central America. The vast majority of these projects, which are listed and operative, successfully generating credits, are from a company called EcoPlanet Bamboo. They're doing some great work around the world planting bamboo. There's a lot of other projects on there that are pending approval or have been rejected, not approved. So Verra does have strict standards. It's hard to get a project approved by Verra. You're looking at something at least $50,000 to $100,000 feasibility studies and consultancy fees to get the PDD produced, approved, and the project design to meet the standards of Verra. Gold Standard is another one of these methodologies or registries that has very strict standards, and these are both fairly well respected by carbon credit buyers. In Europe, there's a methodology by an organization called ANCRA. Don't remember what ANCRA stands for, but ANCRA they're based in Norway. Sorry, in Netherlands. In the Netherlands, sorry. Northern Europe starts with an N. In the Netherlands, they created a registry for carbon credits for planting bamboo in Europe that's mostly based on planting Moso bamboo. And it is a much easier standard to meet than the Verra one, but at the same time, easier does not necessarily mean better. So when it comes to selling the credits, it could be difficult to sell credits from ANCRA. There's an organization called ICROA. ICROA is a party that certifies methodologies. ICROA stands for International Carbon Removal Offset Alliance, I think. Not 100% sure, but like I said, there's a lot of acronyms in this business. So ANCRA is not approved by ICROA, not valid, not certified by ICROA, which means their credits are going to be a little less trustworthy. So watch out for that. Vera and Gold Standard definitely approved by ICROA. CSI, which I work with for carbon credit on biochar projects, is ICROA approved. In the United States, there's no real methodology yet. If you were to be producing carbon credits on a bamboo farm in the United States, you'd have to go with Vera or Gold Standard probably, or else draft your own methodology and try to get it approved, try to get it validated by ICROA. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time selling those credits. So there's some small farmers on the ICROA registry with just a few hectares of bamboo. But the Vera projects, Gold Standard projects, they're more like 5,000, 10,000 hectares. These are big projects, super expensive things to get started. So the barriers to entry are pretty challenging here if you're trying to generate carbon credits by planting bamboo. Something to be aware of. But it is a long-term storage of carbon. The bamboo stays alive even after harvesting and holds that carbon in the soil for a long time if it's managed properly. If it's not managed properly, then you could kill off your bamboo and it won't do so well. If you're not harvesting the bamboo, then the poles will store the carbon for 10 or 15 years or so, but then the poles start to age and crack and rot and decompose, and then you're releasing that CO2 back into the atmosphere. And so you're no longer having a real positive impact, but it's just more of a carbon in, carbon out kind of cycle, same as you would see with other annual types of crops. And so it's important to have a proper harvesting. But when you are harvesting properly, then the bamboo flourishes. You harvest the mature poles, new poles come up. The carbon is trapped in those poles and stored in the building material, and also stored in the rhizome roots underground. And the bamboo tends to stay alive for about 100 years or so. But eventually the bamboo will flower and die, and at that point, the CO2 will be released back into the atmosphere. So that's something to think of. But most of these carbon methodologies, they're looking at about a 20 to 50 year timeline for their carbon storage. But that's a factor to take into consideration: the timeline, the permanence or durability of that carbon removal. And finally, the bamboo is used and harvested, and like I said, if it's not managed, the bamboo will age and decay and release CO2. So it's important to be harvesting the bamboo, doing something with it. And if you look at the life cycle analysis of what's happening with your bamboo, if you're making disposable products like tissue paper or charcoal that's going to be used and flushed down the toilet or burned for cooking and heating, that carbon removal is fairly short term, because once you use it, the product breaks down or is consumed and the CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. So not such a long-term carbon removal in that case. More durable products like building materials, if you're building a house or building construction materials with bamboo, then the carbon that's in the biomass of the bamboo will be stored in the building. The building itself will be a carbon sink because of the carbon that's in the biomass of the bamboo building material. And then there's products like biochar, which I'm a great proponent of. If you turn your bamboo into biochar, the carbon is stabilized in a solid state. The CO2 becomes stabilized as carbon. You put that carbon in the soil and it stays there for upwards of 1,000 years or even more than 1,000 years. So these are super long-term carbon sinks. One of the reasons why I'm a big fan of biochar. I'll get a little more into that later. So now let's look at hemp. How does hemp compare to bamboo? People like to ask me that because I've got a lot of background in hemp, a lot of background in bamboo, and two plants that I love. Hemp, it grows like a weed, as they say. It does grow 10 to 12 feet tall in a single season. The growing season for hemp is about 70 days, plus or minus, depending where you are, if you're up north or down south. And as it's growing, it's drawing down CO2 very quickly. But hemp, unlike bamboo, is an annual crop. So it sucks up all that CO2. Then it's harvested. It flowers. It gets harvested at the end of the season, and then that CO2 is either released from the roots and from the stalks, and then depending on what you do with the hemp itself, it's hard to say where that carbon is going to go. But most of the carbon is it comes in. It's a cycle. It comes in as it's growing, and then releases when it flowers and decomposes at the end of the season. So these are short term carbon sinks. Unlike bamboo, which is a perennial, these are annuals. So there's a lot of hemp varieties out there. Hemp, um, also known as cannabis, also known as marijuana sometimes. Hemp is not a grass. We refer to it as grass, but it's actually not a grass, unlike bamboo. It looks like a tree, is a grass. Hemp is not a grass. It's an annual crop similar to flax or corn or wheat. The corn and wheat are members of the grass family. Hemp, again, is not. Cannabis sativa is the species, whereas there are 1,600 species of bamboo. There's only a couple, 2 or 3 species of cannabis. Cannabis sativa is the most common one, whether it's for industrial use or for psychoactive marijuana production. Cannabis sativa is generally what you're looking at. It can grow big and tall. It can grow short and bushy. Cannabis indica, another species. Now, this is the one that's specifically for the high grade, high THC marijuana products, which you may have read about or you may be familiar with from personal experience. And I don't have a problem with that. But it's not the industrial hemp variety here. Whereas cannabis sativa could be industrial or psychoactive. Cannabis indica is the short, bushy, really sticky, the sticky buds on there. So it's not really for industrial use. The industrial hemp has very low THC content in general, THC being the psychoactive compound. It's great for many, many industrial products, including paper products, textiles, clothing. The seed oil, the oil from hemp seeds, is very nutritious, and it's a great plant for crop rotation. It's nitrogen fixing. It's really good to mix in with other grains, for example, to help the soil in the off seasons. So carbon projects with hemp, there are not so many of these out there. Unlike bamboo, even bamboo, there's like I said, there's about 20 on Vera. Only about half of those have been approved. When it comes to hemp projects, I checked Vera just the other day, and I found one hemp project on Vera. Status was pending validation, under validation, so it's not been approved yet. This was a project in Alberta, Canada, I believe. Good place for growing hemp. So yeah, no hemp projects yet there. There's other methodologies, not widely recognized the way the Vera is. I think Hemp Carbon Standards was the name of it, one that I came across. And again, there's not nearly as much carbon removal taking place with hemp as there is with bamboo because it's an annual crop. And so, from what I read in the methodology, the hemp removes maybe 25 or 30 tons of carbon per hectare of CO2, that is, per hectare per year, and then it releases maybe 20 to 25, so a net removal of about 5 tons of CO2 per hectare, which is not a whole lot, but it's something. And if they can monetize that with carbon credits and incentivize more planting of more hemp for more climate positive action, then that's great. But so far, there's not a whole lot of that going on. And as far as I can see, there's no Vera projects. I don't know of any gold standard projects. This other methodology, they're selling credits, but I don't know how marketable those credits are on this alternative methodology. But yeah, measuring the soil organic carbon is a little bit tricky. It's much easier to measure with biochar, which I'm going to get into later because that's another reason I like biochar. But I'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about biochar. Like I said, biochar does have many great benefits, and as a carbon removal technology, it's a really good one. So Organic material or biomass has captured CO2 through photosynthesis. So we're making biochar from, in this case, let's talk about bamboo and hemp. But you can make biochar out of lots of organic matter. Anything that's growing, absorbing carbon as it grows through photosynthesis. You cook it through a process called pyrolysis, heating it to high temperatures of 500-600 degrees Celsius in a oxygen deprived environment. And then you get something like a very high quality charcoal, which is very high in carbon. And that carbon is stabilized in a solid state. And it is an excellent soil additive. If you add carbon to the soil on a farm, you're increasing the soil organic carbon content of the soil, you're increasing the fertility. Biochar is very conducive to microorganisms or microorganic life, likes to find those little pockets. The biochar is super porous. It's got massive surface area, all these little nooks and crannies, and the microbes like to get in there. And increasing the organic matter and microbial life in the soil, which increases the fertility of the soil. Instead of having to add fertilizers every season, you can add fewer fertilizers, but there's more retention of fertilizers in soil that has high biochar content. It's great for fertility. It's great for water retention, nutrient retention. So we're looking at a product that's about 70 to 80% carbon, almost pure carbon. And this is a long-term carbon sink. Like I said earlier, that carbon, most of it stays in the soil for something like 1,000 years or more. So super long-term. And unlike the carbon that's being captured in your bamboo or your hemp, and you're trying to measure how much carbon or how much CO2 is absorbed by this field of trees or plants or bushes, which there's a lot of different technology out there to do that. You can use uh, satellite measurements. There's different ways to measure CO2 movement across the fields, moving up and down through the air. A lot of different ways to do that, but it's all a little bit tricky. When it comes to measuring carbon in your biochar, it's very tangible. It's very easy to grasp. You can literally hold it in your hand. You can measure it to see how much carbon it is. If it's 50% carbon, 80% carbon, and you know exactly how much carbon you're dealing with, you put it in the ground and you physically handle it and see it going into the ground, and you can know how much carbon you've buried. So that makes the carbon credits that you generate from this very trustworthy, and which is what makes them more valuable. Carbon credits from biochar are about $100 to $200 a ton. So really easy to track, um, relatively easy. There's still quite a process if you're generating carbon credits. There is quite a lot of MRV involved. MRV is monitoring, reporting, and verification of the activities. So all that needs to be tracked and certified and verified. And when it comes to selling the credits, the buyers of credits, they want to see all this data. They want to know everything that's going on with the project, which is why, again, if you're just going to go start some project and plant some hemp and say you got some credits, when it comes to selling the credits, it's a bit harder than people think. There's quite a process of vetting of these projects to make sure you're doing what you say you're doing. And if a company is going to commit to buying hundreds or thousands of carbon credits, they want to be 100% sure that this project is legit and it's making a genuine impact. Because again, this is a voluntary market. Companies are buying credits because they want to make a positive impact. They want to have a lower carbon footprint for their business. And in order to do that, they want to support projects that are for real. A lot of the buyers of credits also look at more than just the carbon, though. They're looking at other social benefits, the jobs that are created, the benefits to the soil, for example, not just how much carbon is trapped in the soil, but what's it doing for soil fertility, what's it doing for food security, for the reduction of chemical fertilizers. And so biochar is really good for all those co-benefits as well. And so I could go on and on about biochar benefits, but I see I've been talking now for about 40 minutes. And I really thank you for listening. I hope you've learned a lot about the difference between biochar credits, hemp credits, bamboo credits. And if you're thinking about planting some bamboo or some hemp, I wish you great success and great luck. And you may want to consider turning that product into biochar at the end. If you're trying to make carbon credits out of the project, the biochar angle might be the best way to go, because measuring again, like I said, measuring the CO2 that's being captured through the photosynthesis is a little bit tricky. But once you turn it into biochar, you have something more tactile that you can literally hold in your hand and say, here's my carbon, here it's going on the ground. And yeah, there's a few methodologies out there to do that. Pure Earth, CSI are the most popular ones. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I'll put some links down below. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I hope I made everything crystal clear. I know it's a complicated subject, but I enjoy talking about it. So I appreciate your time, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. And don't forget to check out my website and like and subscribe and do all that stuff. Thanks again.